All right, so we're going to get started. Sounds like a lot of people are having problem getting the JDBC driver working. That is not in any way surprising to me. So there will be quite a bit of time after the, as usual. As I said on the first day, this is mostly a lab class, so most of the time is work time, but I do. Okay, let me just start where I wanted to start. So actually, a couple things. I added a couple slides to last week's because I wanted to explain. So I wanted to explain a little bit how things work, and I should have had these slides last time, so I'm just going to pretend that it's last week. So this is how MySQL Workbench, or if you're on a Mac, I recommend using SQL Pro. It is way better than MySQL Workbench. But if you want just a program to access your database and add tables, delete tables, add stuff like that, MySQL Workbench is free. Make sure you get the Community Edition. And SQL Pro is also free. So all it does is if you have a SQL database on your own laptop, it connects directly to it via localhost. If you want to connect to my production database, it has to connect through port 3306, and then you can log in with your credentials and edit your tables the same way. So this is just a nice little GUI that helps you do things like that. So it's exactly the same way that your Java program works, right? You could write MySQL Workbench or SQL Pro in Java. You could write your own GUI that adds tables, deletes tables, creates databases in Java, right? I don't actually know what MySQL Workbench is written in. It might be Java. So your Java program would work exactly the same way, right? If it's on localhost, you just connect directly to it. If it's on the production server, you connect through port 3306. And like I said, I will help you guys get your libraries up and running a little bit later on. In the real world, we don't do this, generally speaking, because this is really insecure. Right? You don't want to just open your database to anybody that can connect through port 3306. So generally, we're not going to do this because it's more than this class is about. But generally, what you would do is you would write a program that allows you to access certain commands or certain types of data or something like that. So like the Internet of Things, you often have a little service here. Right? Say I have my fish tank, right? And I store the temperature of my fish tank and the acidity and blah, blah, blah in a database. If I want to look that up on my phone has a little program that doesn't actually access the database. It accesses some other little program that just sends the information that it's allowed to get. So this is the way that you would do it in the real world is you would write a little, if you're just trying to get data from a database, you would write a little program here, kind of as an intermediary, that only lets people see what you want them to see. You don't want to give people access to your entire database. But for this class, we don't care, right? We're worried about learning about databases. We're not worried about like security all that much right now. So, and then PHP, which you guys did, does exactly that, right? The intermediary program in this case is the Apache web server. So you have an Apache web server which runs PHP, and you can only connect with your browser. You can't like write well, you could, but you would still get HTML files back. No matter how you connect to Apache, you can't like go in and look at the database randomly, right? You can only do, in your browser, you can only see what this PHP program wants you to see. So you guys wrote a little PHP program that just selects everything out of the students table, I think, right? There's no way to see the rest of the university database. If you didn't want people to see the rest of the university database, they can't. There's no way to go in through Apache and trick it into sending you the database. It just doesn't work that way. So this is a lot more secure because your PHP program is running locally, connecting to this database, and only sending back the data you are allowing people to see. So, and the nice thing about it too is you can have your PHP program, you can develop it here on your machine, and when you're sure that it's working the way you want, you literally just copy it over, either literally copying it over or using GitHub or whatever you want, and it will work exactly the same way on the production database as it does on your own server. As long as the database is set up the same, this program doesn't know where it is, right? It doesn't know that it's on your laptop instead of the server. All it's looking for is a local database that you have set up somehow, and it sends back HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And it doesn't care who's asking for it. It always does the same thing over and over. So that's why a lot of people use PHP or other server-side languages. So just really quick differences. General purpose, you guys should hopefully know this. It's compiled into generic bytecodes. There's virtual machines on any hardware that will run those bytecodes. So you have to have a Java interpreter on your machine, whether it's a Mac, a Windows, a Linux, whatever. But the program that is compiled in a bytecode runs the same way on all of them. It's easier to debug than PHP. PHP is kind of a pain, although there are much better tools than there used to be. And as you know, you can't change variable types. One big difference is multiprocessing versus multi-threading. And do you guys have to take an architecture course? Have you already, or operating systems? That should cover it. Yeah, that should cover it. Okay, so I don't want to get too much into that, but basically PHP is a single purpose language. It's only for the web, right? Nobody would use PHP to write anything else, right? It's designed specifically for server-side web scripting. It's interpreted, it runs line by line. So unlike Java, when you try to compile and you have an obvious bug, the Java compiler will be like, hey, you spelled int wrong, or something like that. PHP keeps running until there's an error, and then it stops, and you get a white screen of death. You have no idea what went wrong or why. It is hard to debug. But like I said, there are tools, depending on what IDE you're using, that can help you with that. PHP usually is what is running Apache is usually what's running your PHP interpreter. Can be difficult to debug for that reason, and you can change the types of variables on the fly. So different types of languages, generally good for different types of things. All right, so that is not today, that was last time. So today, we're going to talk about Python. So I did say this. So the PHP, hopefully that was pretty easy to get done. The Java program, because so many people are having trouble with the libraries, I'm not going to take any marks off if you don't get that in today. If you don't get that in until next Tuesday, that's fine. I don't really care. One thing is when you submit your files, you might want to take out your password or mark, put in X's or stars or something. I don't really care because I can see, I can see all the stuff in your database anyway. And obviously, you didn't use the same password for the database that you do for your regular account, right? Because that would be foolish. Right. Okay. We definitely don't use the same password everywhere. Side note, good thing worth checking. Have I been pond.com, I think, will tell you whether your email address was part of a data breach. And I would probably guess that most of you have been. Oh, yeah. If you, oh yeah, you have no choice whether you use Equifax or not. They had a data breach of like 250 million accounts, so.
Banks have them all the time, don't they?
Banks less so because they actually care about security, but.
5 breaches.
Yes. So if that does not convince you to use different passwords on every site and a password manager, I would suggest that you think strongly about it. Yes. Anyway, so you can delete your passwords. I'm just going to look at your code. I'm not actually going to run it for this, at least for this assignment. I just want to see that you understand how to connect to the database. So I haven't put in all the grades yet, but I started looking at the normalized database and stuff, and some of you did like the absolute bare minimum, like didn't even link the staff and departments tables, stuff like that. Like, yes, technically it's normalized if you don't connect any of your tables to each other, but this class is supposed to be practical, right? So when you create a university database, I would like to see the staff be a member of a department. Right? If you have those two tables, they should somehow be linked. Right? If you have students in classes, right, it's a pretty boring a university, if the students are not linked to any classes. Right? So I would like you to try and make it as real world as possible within reason. Right? Obviously, I'm not expecting you to create 500 tables to mimic an actual university database. But within the 10 tables that you have, 5 or 10 tables, right, do the connections. Make it realistic. I see a lot of explanations where you are assuming a lot of knowledge, right? I know the answers to the questions, right? You need to convince me that you know the answers to the questions. If you're just copying off my slides, that doesn't show me that you understand anything that you wrote down, right? So pretend you are explaining it to someone in first year computer science, or even better, somebody in high school, or your grandma, right? I would like you to show me that you can explain it in your own words, not just find the answer on Wikipedia and type something similar, right? The point of homework is for you to show me that you get it. So I'm not going to give you 100% if like you're just copying information out of the slides or Wikipedia. That doesn't show me that you understand it. So the better the explanation, if you need to assume that, well, not no knowledge, but little knowledge, right? Like a little, like they know what a computer is, they know what a database is, but you need to explain why is normalization a good thing to somebody that has never heard the word normalization before. Okay, that's what I'm looking for in the homework. I will almost always accept late work, so stuff like the midterm exam, probably not going to accept that very late, unless you tell me beforehand that, you know, you have some kind of emergency. But most, like this database stuff, for this week, the Java stuff, everybody's having a problem with. I'm not going to take any points off because everybody's having problems with it. But for the most part, if you hand stuff in late, I can come up with a very precise 1 point per day kind of thing if you want me to, but generally speaking, you know, if you're a couple days late, I'll take off a point out of 10. If you're a week late, I'll take off a couple points. Just like I'm not super strict about that, but I just want it to be fair is my goal, right? Somebody that put in the work to get it done on time should not have the same grade as somebody that took an extra 3 weeks to get it done, right? Even if they have the same answers, right? So I'm trying to be fair and equitable here. This is my goal. So that's why I don't put like exactly 10% per day, because everybody's got a different situation. So, but the point is, right, say we have 3 things out of 10, and you get like an 8 and a 7 on the first 2, right? So now you have 15 out of 20, right, which is 75%. If you are really late and you don't hand something in, you get 0, which unfortunately, the way math works with our grading system, now you have 15 out of 30. You've gone from 75 to a 50. Zeros are highly overweighted, if you guys have taken stats, because of the way we grade basically 0, 6 to 10, which is the most ridiculous way of measuring things. But even if you hand something like really crappy in and it's late and you get 5 out of 10, oh look, all of a sudden you have 20 out of 30, you still have 66%, right? That's still reasonable. So worst case scenario, right? Always hand something. Life pro tip for your entire college career, always hand something in. Because a few points, the way math works, a few points are much, 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 much better than 0 points. Even if you're embarrassed and late, just do it because it's better than a 0. All right, so that's enough about homework. Best practices for databases and actually servers in general. When you set up your database or your server initially, and we're not setting up servers this year, but at some point in your life you probably will. You will have this user called root. That is the user that can do anything and everything, right? The super user. One of the biggest problems with root is that, if multiple people are administrating the same database and you're all using root and somebody accidentally deletes the database, who was it? Nobody knows, right? The problem with using root as a user is nobody knows who's doing what. There's no logging. There's no way of telling who's doing what. So there are, in a server environment, there are ways to do this where you're given the capabilities you need and it's still tracked by your username. And especially don't allow root to be accessed remotely. You should never be able to log into your database directly from your laptop as root or a server, right? You should always have to log into as yourself and then use root powers, because then at least there's a log of who did what. But what you really want to do is create a user for each use case with the least possible permissions to do their job. If you are a database administrator, you have to get used to saying no and kind of being the bad guy sometimes. Oh, I just want to be able to see this table. Okay, why? Why do you need to see that table? Well, I just want to be able to check it for this. Okay, but you don't need to check it for that. That's not part of your job. Sorry. Oh, well, I just want to check it for him. Okay, well, then he can come and get it, right? He can get access. It's not your job, right? Your job as a database administrator, right, is to protect the database. Because if you say, oh yeah, I'll just give you access, and he deletes everybody's data, guess whose fault it is? Right? It's not that guy's fault. He's an idiot. Yeah, everybody will be like, oh yeah, he's an idiot, but who's going to get fired? You are, because you're the database administrator. The database is your domain. So give people the least possible permissions to get their job done. We'll talk about that again when we get to the midterm project, because you can go crazy with this. For the purposes of this class, you can just use your user, right? You don't need to create multiple users for our projects, even though that would be the right thing to do in a business environment, right? When we create our projects, you might have an administrator, like you're making a record store, right? So you might have the cashier be able to see certain things, the owner be able to see certain things. You don't need to worry about doing all that for our projects in this class. But you would want to do that if you were building a real database for a real store. Yeah, so you just want to limit the databases they can see, the tables they can see, whether they can actually change data, right? Some users probably don't ever need to change data. Can they insert new data, right? Can they just select data? So you will have to create a use case for each user and say, this is what this person should be able to do, and document it so that when, the next database administrator comes along, they can see, oh, this is why this person has this access and not that access. So remember yesterday, when I pretended to be talking yesterday, I said we don't do remote connections, generally speaking. Imagine you had millions of people, right, running your Java program, trying to connect to the production database. That's a lot of connections going in and out, right? That's going to be your bottleneck right there. If you're using MySQL Workbench because you're the database administrator, that's one connection, maybe two if you have someone else in your department. But you wouldn't want to have an application on your laptop or on millions of people's laptops all trying to remotely connect to one database. That is a huge bottleneck, right? Either you would want a service that is designed to do that, like Apache, or you would want to have a local database that then synchronizes itself somehow. So connections to a database are slow if you have to go over across machines. You have to open port 3306, so again, that's insecure. And most database, this is changing in the last couple of years, but most database commands are sent through clear text, which is so if you were using like HTTP instead of HTTPS, and you're using port 3306, and you're using something that's sent through clear text, in theory, somebody could watch all the commands going back and forth between your program and the database. So they could get the structure of all the tables, they could get all the, well, hopefully not passwords because you wouldn't store them in clear text, but you get the idea, right? It's just not a secure or fast way to do it. And you would have to set up, you would actually, in your program, have to set up some kind of secure connection to your database, right? Apache does that for you with HTTPS. So for all these reasons, we don't do that, the example that I showed you. The thing that we're doing in class, we don't do that in the real world, right? We don't have a Java program on our laptop connecting to the database through port 3306, right? It's just not something that's done, except when you're in a class learning about how to connect to databases. All right, so as I said yesterday, Java versus PHP, but today we're going to start with Python. So on the client side, it's kind of like Java in that it's a general purpose language. You can do anything you want with it. However, it is interpreted, not compiled. So kind of like PHP, it's run one line at a time, and it doesn't know about future lines until it gets there and breaks. Luckily, it actually will spit out a useful error message, unlike PHP, right? Because PHP can't spit out useful HTML error messages if it died. So, but Python can. So Python will tell you, kind of like the Java compiler, hey, I died, this is why, right? It runs on any hardware that has the Python 3 interpreter. So kind of like you say, I got Java, blah, 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 my jar file. You say Python 3, my .python file, right? So same idea. Python 3 is compiled for any operating system you can possibly imagine. And make sure you're using Python 3, not Python 2. If you just type Python, it's probably Python 2. You can always check by doing -V. So if you just type in your command line Python -V or Python 3 -V, right, you should be able to see what you're running. And we are going to use Python 3. Python 2 is not quite dead, but it's in hospice. Super easy to debug, right? Because it runs line by line and is not compiled, you can run it line by line in a debugger, right? Super easy. The IDE I would recommend you use actually, as if you're a first-time Python programmer, is called Thonny, and it has like a debugger right there. Like you just click debug instead of run, and it just like does it all for you. It's super nice. Not as powerful as like IntelliJ or PyCharm or whatever, but super easy to use. Dynamically typed, so you can make a string into an integer and back and forth, unlike Java. But recently, you can actually add hints. So if you're using a big data set, you can give Python some hints as to what kind of data it is so that it speeds things up. And you have both multi-threading and multiprocessing, but you have to explicitly decide what you're doing. On the server side, you can actually run Python as its own web server, and we're going to do that today. I will show you how to do that. You can also run it in Apache like PHP. I prefer not to do that. But there are all these web frameworks that you can use. We're going to use Flask because it's super easy to set up and run. But some of you may have heard of Django. Has been really, really popular recently, and there's like 5 million others that you can get into. But I'm going to show you how to use Flask because literally in 5 minutes you guys will be like, oh, wow, that's pretty easy. And the way it works is you create template HTML files with like variables inside them, and then you fill in that from whatever your local database is. And you send the HTML file back to the client. So it looks kind of like this. Client Python just looks just like our Java one. If you make, you can Python. You can create a GUI just like you can in Java that then in the background connects. But as I just spent 10 minutes telling you, this is a really bad idea. So this is, well, this isn't a bad idea for our class, right? If you want to just make a really simple program with a GUI that is, record store again, add a record, sell a record, and just in the background connects to this, that is perfect for this class because this class is about this part, learning the database. I don't care how you connect to it. But if you want to be a little fancier, you can use Python running Flask, and you'll notice that Apache is not anywhere to be found. You don't have to install Apache on your laptop to run it. Python includes Flask as a library, so you just say import Flask, and then you can literally connect to the Python program as a web server. And it can connect to a database. It can do whatever you want. And again, the nice thing about that is, this file, right? It doesn't care whether it's on whether it's on your laptop connecting to the local database or whether it's on my server connecting to the local database. As long as your username and password are the same and the database structure is the same, this program doesn't care. And if you want to be professional about it, you can even add like an environment variable that says, oh, look, I'm on my laptop, use my laptop username and password. Oh, look, I'm on production, use my production username and password, or whatever, right? But for this class, this is a really nice way of doing things for us because we can, as I'll show you in a couple minutes, You can create your Python program, put it up in GitHub, and then just pull it down on mrbartus.com, and away you go. Super easy. All right, so I want to show you how easy it is. Oh, I was going to use my laptop because I don't think, yeah. Well, I can do it this way. I bet I can do this. So Thani is the Python IDE that is super easy to use. And I think I can install it without administrator privileges.
Is that like JGraphs for Python? Yeah.
It's like Dr. Java, if you've ever used that. So it won't work. Oh, here we go. Sure, why not? So let me go into
import Flask for each different Python project?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yes.
I imported it for something else, but
So it should still, depending on how you set it up, it should still be in there. So Thani, I think just finished. Yep, just Thani. So all you have to do, unlike the Java libraries that you guys are going a little crazy on, is I just go manage packages. I say, wait, PyMySQL. So what I'm going to do first, PyMySQL. Done. Flask, which is the other thing. Install. Done. It's that easy, right? Okay, so let me go into CS485. Oh, I didn't create the assignment yet, but I'll do that. Python, MySQL database. So here's the code. I can make it bigger so you can see it. All right, so I run it. I got to save it as something. Database. So there's, yeah, it's literally that easy. So all I did was import that library, PyMySQL. I connect to mrbartus.com with the user and password, the example ones. Try, so this is just a little exception handling. I select star from students. I execute the command. And for each result in my cursor, I just print it. And finally, I close the connection. Like literally, that's it. There is no more code in here. So if you compare this to the Java code, right? I feel, personally, you may have a different opinion, but I'm right. This is a lot easier.
Like saying, I'm sorry, you are wrong.
Well, it's a democracy. I'm just the only one with a vote, so. And then the only thing you need to remember is if you actually change the database, insert, update, or create, it won't, unlike when you do it in PHP-MyAdmin, it doesn't automatically commit your changes. So you just have to uncomment this if you're doing that. OK, so there's that. That's one half of it, connecting to the database. The other half is the web server that I told you about. So you can imagine what a pain in the butt it would be for me to try to get Apache on this machine. So instead of doing that, here's my Flask demo. Oh, this one's a little bigger. because I added a bunch of stuff. Let me just, I know what I'll do. I'm just going to do this. So again, I'll make a new one. Return, hello, Mr. Bartus. So that's all I'm going to do with that. And then I just have to be able to run it. So I'm going to create a little web server here. And I can even choose which port I want. Let's call it, I don't know, 5000. Actually, I think it chooses that by default. Anyway, so I run this. I call it Flask example. And can I not make this bigger? Oh, there we go. All right, and down here, if I click on this, there's my web server. Done. Don't need to install Apache or any handlers. Don't have to worry about ports or anything. Literally, I import the Flask library. I set the package name. So a route is a web page. Is what you can think of a route as a web page. So this is obviously the default, but I could make it like Mr. B. So actually, let me just add a new one. Cakes. All right, so I'm going to add a new page called cakes, and I define that page as returning this. So I just rerun it, and I go to cakes, yummy cakes. Right, so this is pretty cool. And in my example, I show you how to use some, you guys can clone this repository, but this is literally the end of this, which is going to be part of your assignment, Raspberry Flask server. Right, you're going to go through this, and it'll show you how to do it in 6 steps, 8 steps. So that is why I would recommend trying Python. Some of you may enjoy Java or PHP more, and that is totally fine. Again, I do not care at all what tools you use as long as you learn the material. And my focus is on the database side, whether we're learning how to connect to a database and use a database, because that's what this course is about. I don't care whether you use Python or Java or PHP. So you can use, literally, if you wanted to, well, I can't show you on there, but literally, if you wanted to, you could just use a text editor to make your Python file, and then in the command line type Python3 file name, and it would work. Or you can use Thonny, which is the one I just showed you, which is super lightweight, easy to use. Debugging is a little tricky with web stuff, but right, you can see right here, there's a debug. Right, and it'll just take you step by step through these things. I mean, there's not a lot to see in this, but you can also see variables and stuff on the right-hand side right there. It's just like, it's really nice because it's not like IntelliJ or Eclipse or whatever where it kills you with features. It doesn't have 90% of the features that they have, but it has the 10% that you need, right, to learn, to get going. So Thonny is a great way to learn Python. And the only time you should ever not use Thonny is if you get to a point where you're like, I really need X, right? And some other IDE has it, right? It doesn't have, for example, Git. You can't use Git from within this IDE. It doesn't do, refactoring. Are we going to need to refactor for this app? Probably not, right? So Thonny is a great place to start until you get to the point where it does not do what you want. PyCharm is made by whoever makes IntelliJ. I can't remember the name. Yep, JetBrains. So if you got the student version of IntelliJ, you can also download the student version of PyCharm, which is the same as the professional version. A lot of people like that. Very popular industry. I use VS Code just because I'm teaching a JavaScript class, and VS Code is really good for JavaScript. You're going to go through that tutorial that I brought up. Going to take you about 10 minutes. If it doesn't work, I'll also post my repository that I just showed you. So in that, wait a minute, this is backwards. That is backwards. That should be, sorry, you should do that afterwards. Using PyMySQL. I will give you that code as well. And I want you there we go. There we go. That's what I meant to say. All right. So you're going to create a Python connection to the university database. So that's what I showed you first in Thonny. What I would like you to try to do is use the input function. Say, what student are you looking for? The user types in Bartus, and you change the select command to say, select star from students where last name equals variable that they input. So it's a little bit of Python you might have to learn. You'll have to learn how to use input and change the select statement. So not a huge amount, but hopefully get your toes a little bit wet. And if you can use, I will again post a link to the example code that I just ran that connects to the generic database. I would like you to go through the Flask tutorial on Raspberry Pi just to learn how Flask works. Hopefully you all have some fundamental understanding of HTML and CSS. Yes, no, maybe so, a little bit. Like, it doesn't get complicated. It's literally like the HTML is here, the CSS makes your background red. It's not like, yeah, it's not getting crazy. Again, the focus is on the database, right? So what I want you to do is change that Flask server, so the web server, so all it does is just select star from students, something like that. So I will create a GitHub assignment with those examples in it, and you guys can do that. One thing that you're going to want to do, yes, I should have mentioned that. So when you create your Flask server, right, by default it uses 5,000. That's what Flask does. But what I would recommend is you use the numbers from your ID. Otherwise, if you both are running Flask at the same time on the server, you're both trying to use port 5,000. It's like trying to run 2 copies of Apache at the same time. The browser won't know which Apache to go to. So you can just make it like mine is 2279. So those are the middle 4 numbers of my Winona ID. 2279 is not going to work. Oh, I think it is host. Is it port? Something like that. I can figure it out. It'll be in the example code, but yeah, there we go. Right, so now it's on port 2279 instead. So it won't conflict with anybody else unless you both have the same middle 4 numbers, but that would be